Welcome to Trulyfit.
Julia, welcome back to the Trulyfit Podcast for the second time. The first episode was fantastic. For those who did not hear it, why don't you give a brief background and bio of who you are, sort of your credentials, your bona fides, and what you do day to day in the health industry.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm so excited to be back. I am a fascia release expert, educator, and practitioner. I've had a in-person practice in Golden, Colorado for the last 13 years, I believe. Time is flying. So I help both with pain as well as issues with mobility and performance, recovery, and even relieving stress and trauma out of the body with strategic fascia release work. So I work both in person, but also virtually. I help a lot of people through virtual courses and even virtual sessions these days, as so many of us have since 2020.
Sure.
So it's a wide range. I work with anyone from just an everyday mover all the way up to professional athletes. And it's been a really fun and exciting time for the last decade plus.
The first episode was called Pain and Fascia. And for anyone who thinks that was just sort of an intro, it was not. So you could actually probably, after this episode, go back and listen to that, because we did a really deep dive into all things fascia. I would call it more of like a Fascia 301. It was like a 300 level college class where we started to talk a little bit more science-y. I don't know if we'll get there today because we want to focus on some other things. We're probably just going to go more 101 level. So we can go back and listen to that episode. I'm glad I did this morning so we can maybe avoid some of that talk and go in different directions. But let's first start with you. Do you feel like your practice has changed since I've last spoken with you, or do you do anything else outside of the fascia work, or do you really just focus on that right now?
Yeah, well, in the last 6 months, I've hired a new practitioner to join my practice, which has been really exciting. I've been training her really since 2020, and it's been such a fun time to add such an incredible addition, but also it allows me to step away from my practice a little bit. I was doing so many sessions and I love it, but I'm now stepping into more of an educator role. I have 2 different certifications now. So I have one that is more of an entry level understanding fascia, pain patterns, how to work with fascia, how to assess clients' alignment and movement, and then be able to help address that fascia through the use of recovery tools. And that could be, foam rollers, lacrosse balls, soft Pilates balls, things like that. And then I also have a bodywork mastery program that I'm teaching people how to do the actual physical bodywork side of this very unique work. So I've been stepping much more into the teacher role. It's really fun to wear that teacher hat. Actually, I've been enjoying it quite a bit.
Yeah, one would think you would have to even quicker than someone like myself, a personal trainer. I could go through a whole session without touching a weight, without demonstrating. Of course, I still do those sorts of things. But with you, there's so much that's hands-on, right? So you have to worry about whatever, arthritis and things of that nature afterwards. And it's just, it can be intensive, almost like massage therapy-esque, where eventually you have to maybe dial back the physical part of the job and work into more of the educational realm.
Sure. I also I've seen so many incredible results over the years. I have incredible testimonials and clients that have gone through such wild transformations. It's more of like, I'm tired of keeping this to myself. I can only work so many hours physically, but also my impact is so much smaller if it's just me at my office all day, every day. So I'm starting to get, that same really excited feeling I used to get at the beginning when, I'd help someone resolve a pain. I'm now getting that same feeling when one of my practitioners is like, oh my gosh, this person came in and I fixed their plantar fasciitis or whatever it is. I'm like, oh, there's that feeling again. It's really exciting to get more impact and start bringing this work to such a wider range of people.
Yeah, not to mention that sort of intrinsic or internal motivation is going to drive you more than money or just expanding, right? The fact that you want to help more people, that's really how you're going to end up, expanding in a more prolific way.
Yeah. I mean, if you go back and listen to our first episode, I talk more in depth about my own story and how this work has really helped in a way that nothing else could when it came to the nerve damage in my arm. But I'm also an active person, and pain is part of life, right? Sometimes you get knee pain or you wake up with a crick in your neck, and being able to resolve these things on your own when you can address it quickly because you know how, it's something, again, you get so excited. You just want everyone to know that it's possible for them too.
Let's quickly go over the episode as far as the fascia is concerned, just so people have an understanding. I would like to do it from maybe two angles. One, what is fascia? You're talking to a 12-year-old, right? Or you're talking to just somebody who has no idea about the body. And then two, what is fascia that you could explain to a personal trainer, maybe something they don't know and they think that they know when we're talking about fascia.
Okay. Maybe I'll try to combine these. So fascia is, scientifically speaking, it's the biological fabric that weaves through every single cell that we have, and it's what organizes all of the water and material in our body. For your 12-year-old person, think of it like plastic wrap that wraps around every single thing. So every muscle fibril, every muscle fiber, every muscle, tendon, ligament, joint, organ, bone, nerve, it's all wrapped like a three-dimensional plastic wrap suit that we have on the inside. And so because fascia wraps around every single thing, it's therefore going to influence the position and function of everything. So it's what gives us our shape and our structure. It's what allows our muscles and muscles and joints to glide. It's also what gives us our, bouncy springiness. It's how we absorb shock and have resilience in our body. It's also how we get all hydration and nutrients down to the cellular level, to all of the things that are required. So essentially, it is plastic wrap that has a little hydration irrigation system built in that is this secret system that's doing so many different things on the back end and really influences how our body is able to move and function as a whole. If that is that combining both, do we combine both?
That's fantastic. And I'll just add something to that, because my first thought is I'm always trying to put myself in the general population's mindset, right? What would they ask? They would go, well, Julia, if it's all that, how come I've never heard of it? Well, you have heard of it, but they call it connective tissue.
Yes, they call it connective tissue. They also call it myofascia, which you absolutely can call it that. However, myo, scientifically, that means muscle. So myofascia is really only referring to fascia around the muscle, and fascia is an entire system. It wraps around organs, it wraps around bones. So I like to think of it as just one whole system. It's so much more than just the muscles. And I've also heard people refer to it like it's some kind of a sausage casing that simply goes around the outside of the muscle. So it's important to understand the layer upon layer upon layer system that it is, which we'll definitely talk more about as we dive into these questions.
And then another sort of 101 question here is, what role does it play in flexibility and mobility? Does it work in both of those? And what do you consider the difference between those two?
Good question. So let's start with flexibility for a moment. So most of us, when we think flexibility, we think stretching, right? And that's really lengthening the muscle fiber in one plane of motion, or it's really only focused on one muscle or one muscle group at a time. And I think of this more as an old model of thinking. I really care fairly little about flexibility. I've seen plenty of gymnasts and other people over the years that have great flexibility in some areas and a lot of other struggles in other areas. So what I'm more concerned about is mobility. And mobility to me means more active movement. So it's full range of motion throughout a joint. And most importantly, it's motion in a three-dimensional way. And so fascially speaking, I care way more about the ability of all of our muscles and joints to be moving in a three-dimensional way across multiple planes of motion. Kind of hand in hand with mobility, I would also talk about stability, right? And that's our ability to control the mobility that we have with the impact of gravity. And so, all of the force that goes through our body is traveling through our fascial system. We have 10 times as many proprioceptors in our fascia than we do in our muscles. So a lot of the way we understand how to move our body, where to move our body, and how to control it is coming from our fascial system as well.
Who needs fascial work? That's the next question the general population would say. How do I know when I need it? And I would love to do this, what I call the who, what, where, when, and how situation here, right? So like if we're going through, foam rolling techniques, let's say somebody who's going to use the foam roller, who needs it? Let's go with who first.
Oh man, well, truly the vast majority of people do. I've worked on kids as young as 8 years old, and I have a current client right now who is 81, and there is everyone in between that usually needs this work. If you're experiencing any kind of pain, stiffness, injury, or like you kind of feel every time you work out, there's something else that's bothering you, those consistent things that keep popping up. If you have slow recovery times, if you wake up feeling stiff in the morning, really anything where your body is not functioning optimally is a sign that you could use some fascia work.
Now onto the what. What is the goal?
What is the goal? Well, ideally, it's to rehydrate, repattern our fascia. That's going to allow us to restore all of our movement capabilities and essentially I'll throw another analogy at you. Fascia is a bit like a wet sponge that encases everything in our body. And the more, we sit, the more movement patterns we repeat over and over, the more injuries we sustain, we start to get a version of a dried out sponge happening in our body. So if you think about trying to twist and bend a dry sponge, it's way more brittle. It doesn't move very easily. It's more likely to snap, right? So that's the analogy for injury. What we want is the most wet sponge hydrated version, which allows us to, again, move any way we want, feel fluid in whatever we do, and really have no limitations.
The next one is where, and where on my body is important. And I don't want to lead the witness too much, but I think you would agree with this statement when I say many of times where the pain isn't where the problem is. So how do we make those distinctions?
Well, ideally, we want to work everywhere in our fascia because it's all one system that's connected. We want everything to be a nice hydrated sponge. So that can be all the way from bigger muscle groups like in the quads and in the core, all the way down to between our metacarpals. But I do find over the years, there are some spots that tend to be more tight on most people. So the quads, the adductors, the core fascia, the lats, and the pecs are probably the top areas I would say most everyone needs because we do so much sitting. We do so much poor breathing due to stress or just a general slouch position that we have. We don't often do a lot of overhead arm movements. And so most of those areas are certainly the top ones that I would start with that are contributing to a lot of different types of aches and pains. But you're right. Really, where you feel pain is almost never the problem. And so there is a bit of discovery and learning involved to discover what really is necessary for your specific pain that you're experiencing.
When is next? Do we do this pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout, on off days, all the above?
It depends on what your intention is. So if you're looking to really warm up your muscles or improve your mobility a little bit so that you can have a more successful workout, if you're about to do a bunch of overhead squats and you need the best mobility you can have to drop down as low as you can go, it's great to do it before a workout. If you're looking to improve your recovery time or reduce soreness or just generally hope to improve your sports performance over time, I would suggest doing it after your workout. But yeah, if you're experiencing a lot of pain, you don't need to wait for a workout. I would say on your rest day, anytime you're starting to feel that pain come on, I would tackle it sooner rather than later.
Okay. I thought maybe the hardest one was what or where, but maybe this is the hardest one now. It's how. And how do I know it was effective? Is it just a subjective, now there once was pain and now there isn't? Is there some sort of objective measures? How do we know that this has been effective?
Well, there's two parts to the how, I think. So the number one part and what I've found over the years is that we have to address fascia in a way that combines compression, cross fibering, and active movement. So instead of simply rolling up and down on a roller or laying on a massage ball for 10 minutes at a time, we need to compress an area of fascia and then actively move. Usually the cross fibering is happening with the active movement due to the movement. But that's a very important part in order to rehydrate and repattern fascia. So that is part of the how. It's probably different from most of the things that you've done before. But there's other things as far as how do you know it was effective? There's usually a feeling of warmth. Occasionally, I've heard people have a cool rush as well, but a feeling of a rush of warmth right after. That's a great sign that blood flow is getting to that place and hydration is coming back to that area. I usually get a bit of a gentle tingling or a light type of feeling. That's one of the most common things I hear from others as well. You may feel an immediate decrease in your pain or an increase in your mobility. And typically, the more consistent you are with that, the quicker the results are going to be. In the long term, you should feel more loose, more fluid, more pain-free, have better performance, all of the main things that we're all hoping for when it comes to feeling our best.
That was great information. I'm going to ask you to just elaborate a little bit on what you consider and call this kind of active movement without using the roller. I know what you're talking about. You're saying the roller is in one place and your body is moving. You're using it almost like a fulcrum back and forth, but give us maybe a better picture of what you're speaking of.
Well, again, we talked about stretching before, how lengthening muscles in one plane of motion is really doing so very little. So the idea here is, can we press a massage ball or a roller into a certain area? Let's say, for example, the calf. If I press a ball into my calf and start flexing and pointing from my ankle and circling from my ankle, I'm now starting to move all kinds of different parts of that muscle in that area in a more three-dimensional way through different planes of motion. So really that's the key. And it doesn't need to be your entire body, although there are some fun, interesting ways that you can start to incorporate bigger, more dynamic body movements with this type of work. But sometimes it's as simple as, pressing a lacrosse ball into your pec and reaching your arm over your head, doing some internal, external rotation. All of that three-dimensional movement is really what starts to remold and restructure that fascia.
And you don't see that enough. At least I don't. Anecdotally, looking around the gym, people are using the roller as one would assume, right? I need to roll on this instead of maybe even if you're putting it across your back, kind of perpendicular, and opening up your shoulder blades, closing your shoulder blades, putting your hands behind your head, hugging yourself, making sure that we can get inside of those smaller muscles around the scapula and put some pressure on there and move around rather than just roll back and forth, which seems way more superficial, correct?
Right. We're getting those first few layers of fascia. And again, we're just kind of going up and down roughly with the grain of the fibers. So when we start to incorporate, especially those shearing type of movements where we're moving perpendicular to the way our muscle fibers run, it will actually activate a cell within our fascia called a fasciocyte that is the Kickstarter to producing hyaluronic acid in the body, which is essentially full body grease for both your joints and your muscles. So if you're not getting any kind of cross fibering, we're not affecting those deeper layers, and we're not really maximizing the amount of hydration we can get to that spot.
Something I deal with a lot in my industry is that personal trainers, even, and the general population will assume that if a muscle is very tight, that it's overworked. They go, oh, muscle's tight, it's overworked. They can't put the concept together that something can be both weak and tight. Can you explain why that is actually maybe the case more often than not, especially for the general population, and how what we do really affects that issue?
Sure. I mean, there is the possibility that something can be both tight and strong. That usually has to do with the volume of workout you're doing, or the amount of repeated times you're doing the same thing. That's certainly possible. But there's two different versions of this. So tight weak is very common. So the body is going to send all of its resources to the areas you're actually using. So if you're not very active, or you're doing the same movements over and over where you're really only using a specific set of muscles, everything else does not get allocated the same resources. So fascia is going to start to shrink a little bit and stick to itself. We can go back to that plastic wrap analogy. It's starting to kind of adhere to itself. And now it's pushing hydration out. So there's less blood flow getting to it. The brain will probably send less innervation there, like our capacity to fire nerves. And there's no longer going to be the same type of ability to expand and contract that muscle at its full capacity. So as it starts to shrink down with everything inside of it, yeah, that muscle will absolutely become weak, but it's also very tight. So that's very common. There's also a concept of being tight long, like tight in a lengthened position.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different than being weak, although it absolutely can be weak as well. And I see this a lot. The hamstrings are a perfect example, where people are like, oh my gosh, my hamstrings are so tight. And they stretch them and crank away on them, but it doesn't seem to be resolving. And the issue that I find is it's because there's actually tension happening on the opposite side. So usually within the quads and hip flexors, most people, we all do mostly quad dominant activities unless you're very intentional. And so when all of the fascia in those quad hip flexor areas gets tense, it tends to pull the pelvis forward into a more anterior tilt. It bails the hips forward a bit. And your hamstrings, which are attached to the backside of your pelvis, right? Now they're being lengthened because of that anterior tilt. And they're going to lock down in an attempt to prevent your pelvis from just completely toppling over and having your entire spine and body go with it. And so there's not going to be any opportunity for your hamstrings to let go until you've actually addressed the problem that's on the opposite side. This is also true in the upper body. So most people have this terrible, back of their neck or upper back pain. And the issue is actually coming from the front. There's tension through the pecs, the scalenes, the front part of the neck. And that's actually contributing to this lengthening of the back and the pain that they're feeling in the back. So it's important to know that, yeah, those muscles might feel really tight or really stiff, but they're just holding on for dear life to prevent some terrible misalignment or spinal compromise position from happening. And it's going to be really difficult for that muscle to get a whole lot stronger if it can't fully let go and also contract, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think it's a good segue into our next topic here, which is the common hip issues, because you did mention anterior pelvic tilt. How do you deal with that from a fascial perspective or otherwise? A lot of the general population has this, as you say, because they're sitting down all day. Things get weak, things get lengthened that shouldn't be lengthened, things get tight, whatever. And we see that, at least I see that more people have anterior pelvic tilt than certainly a posterior pelvic tilt, definitely that are just sort of a neutral pelvis. And it takes a while for people to even kind of understand that. Like if I try to teach somebody how to push themselves into anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, the general population can't do that without a lot of practice. So how exactly do you go about working with people? Do you see it as a big problem? And do you see it also, I guess, as a secondary issue of something else? Or do you see it as sort of the primary issue? Or does that not matter?
Yeah, good question. So a little bit of an anterior and posterior tilt, I'm honestly not super concerned about. But the reality is rarely ever, I see if I can avoid the word never, but rarely ever does a tilt present alone, because everything in our body is connected. So a lot of times I see when there's an excessive anterior tilt, so that big arch is happening in the low back, right? There's usually outwardly rotated feet, like duck feet. There's a little bit of external rotation in the femur and a forward head. Those usually all present at the same time. Same thing with an excessive posterior tilt. I usually see a lot of kyphosis, that rounding forward of the upper back and shoulders. and some either a bend in the knee or a hyperextension of the knee happening at the same time. So it's more of a clue to look at the bigger picture and see how the rest of the body is holding itself. But I think even more so concerning than a tilt is a rotation happening in the pelvis.
Yeah.
I truly see rotations even more often than I'm seeing tilts. So that means, you might be rotated forward and down on one side and then sort of shifted up and back on the other. And rotation in the body tends to be more problematic because your spine is no longer on a very stable surface. And so a rotation in the pelvis could cause low back pain, sciatica, SI pain, knee pain, plantar fasciitis. There's kind of a whole list of things that might happen when the body is functioning at this really strange rotation.
Not to mention sorry to interrupt, not to mention a lot of times you get this like synthetic, for lack of a better term, like leg length discrepancy because your pelvis is turned, right? And then people start to obviously now muscles on one side are being used more than the other because of the legs being off, because of the hips being twisted.
Yeah. And then you end up with, arthritis on one knee, or you just have an issue on one side of your body. And then, you think, it's just a problem with, this is my bad leg. Or, we have all these justifications. It's like, no, if your hips were in a neutral position, there would be the same wear and tear pattern happening on both sides. And likely this one-sided pain wouldn't be happening. And that's really the real question is like, why is this pain only on my left side and not on my right? The answer is always in the way your alignment looks. And that's what gives me a huge indication as far as like what's happening in the fascia. I would say though, if you have a big tilt happening in your pelvis, one of the little known facts is the adductors, which are the inner thighs. Those are the biggest indicators of your pelvic tilt, especially the mid to high up towards the tendon of the adductor. Those influence the pelvic tilt more than anything else, more than the hamstrings and the quads. I know we want to beat up on them quite a bit, but that would be my number one spot for you to start working on your own. As high up as you can get into the adductor, it's really helpful for that.
Well, why don't we give some sort of tangible ways in which one can do that? What is your recommendation if you're not working with a practitioner like you? If I'm sitting at home and I have some sort of foam roller, how do I work on my adductors?
Yeah, you can use a foam roller, but you know what? If you have access to a basketball, that might be even better. If you lay on the floor a bit like you're in a plank position, and then lift one leg and put your high inner thigh up on the top of a basketball, or again, it could be a foam roller. I just find sometimes I need more leverage, something that's higher off the ground to get up into the high spot of the adductor. But I'm going to place my weight down on it. So I know it's a bit hard to visualize, but if you're laying in a plank position,
I'll give another analogy. Sorry, I'll give another analogy here. It's like the dog peeing on the fire hydrant.
Oh yeah, there you go. You've got it. Yeah, as close as you can get to about a 90-degree angle with the hip and the knee. That would be great. And then from there, you would straighten and bend your knee a few times slowly. If you can bend your knee back to 90 degrees and then lift and lower your heel a few times, that's where that lovely cross-fibering action comes in. Doing that, 4 to 10 times, come off that spot, walk it out. You can do, 2-3 spots on each side, depending on how tight it feels in there. But yeah, you could do that with a foam roller or a medicine ball. You can be creative with what you have. The tool is less important as long as there's a good amount of compression happening. It can't be a pillow, right? You can't just put a pillow under there.
And to go back to something you said before, which I think all sort of merges together perfectly, is the reason why the adductors are also a very important part of this problem is because what you said before, when things aren't being worked, they sort of atrophy. And the adductors, because they're smaller muscles, they're not going to be used in the same way in the traditional exercises working in sagittal plane, right? So when you're doing your heavy squats and your deadlifts and even your lunges, right? The adductors are at best a tertiary, if not a fourth level muscle, right? They're not firing because the big muscles are taking over. So unless you're doing specific exercises to get those muscles to fire, what happens? They atrophy. And then the fascia, according to you, which makes perfect sense, says, well, we don't need to be in this area. So it sort of crinkles up around that area. It takes water from that area, and then the proprioception of that area is off, and everything gets sort of thrown off. So that's why we do need to focus on smaller muscles and make sure that we're firing those muscles, not, because even if you do the fascial work and then you don't actually use your adductors, you're going to have to continue to do the fascial work.
Yeah, perfectly said. And the one addition I'll say is we all tend to, so many of us sit with our legs crossed. And even in just a normal sitting position, our femurs tend to rotate inward a little bit. So all of this shortening of the adductors between a lack of working them when we're actually doing our workout, and then they're continuing to be in a shortened position when we do things like sit, it's just a recipe for all of this tension to accumulate there.
Let's go into less sciencey stuff and some more of the business stuff here for fun,
Sure.
Especially for people who are in our industry working with people. Somebody listens to this conversation, or maybe they've been going down this route and they said, you know what, this is what I want to do. I was a personal trainer. I've been working with clients. I see that this fascial release is really helping them. I'm more in tune with this and I want to go this route. What advice would you give to them? Is there a course that they should be taking? Should they maybe fuse it first with their business already? Because it's hard to just get a bunch of clients who are doing this.
Yeah, good question. So of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased that, I have a fascia release specialist certification that I feel has the newest research and the most holistic view of how to really assess pain and posture and get fascia to be in its best possible stage. But, I actually started as a personal trainer, roughly ages 22 to 26. And I mainly focused on corrective exercise. I've always been in the world of rehab. It's, being born with nerve damage, you get obsessed and on a one-way track from a young age, I think, with that. But I was already getting all of these clients that were coming to me with issues, with pain, with limitations in some capacity. And so as I started learning about fascia work, it was actually the perfect combination of things where I'd work out with someone with 45 minutes and then for the last 15 minutes, we would do fascia release work. But I found, it became, 30 and 30. And then some people just wanted to come for fascia because I was getting so much better results with the fascia work than I was with corrective exercise alone. So I think the combination is really powerful. Like ultimately, I fell out of love with training and I've just been completely in love with fascia instead. But that would have been a great career path had I kept both of those together, honestly, because no one is really doing it well, at least in the general pool. So I think it's a really big deal to have this extra skill set. It's also enabled me, with the recovery tool work, it's enabled me to take virtual clients, which is something really I didn't know that I could do until 2020 with the rest of us, where I'm like, how can I still help people from afar? And that's another way you could possibly expand your business and reach a bigger target audience, because I'm able to still see what people's alignment looks like and help talk them through how to do this recovery type of work on their own. So it's also a possibility that you can expand how many clients you're able to work with as well.
What do you feel is the difference? Because I talk about this a lot in personal training, between doing your virtual work and your non-virtual work. Obviously, it's not the same, right? You can't be 100% the same. If you and I are working together in a room and you're able to, actually palpate and put your hands on me and do things, you're always going to have a little bit more information. So how do you navigate that? And like, what is maybe important to be concerned with when you're doing virtual training in the fascial space?
Well, I do have people, they're required to submit photos of their standing posture to me. It's very difficult to see it on Zoom. So I need someone to take pictures in a specific way from all angles. That really helps me understand what alignment is really going on. But, ultimately it's not the same. I would much rather see someone in person, especially if I'm able to combine the recovery work with the actual body work I do. It's just more powerful because I can add more weight. I'll often be standing with a significant amount of weight, occasionally my full body weight on an area of fascia. And the change that you can make in such a small amount of time is just, it's kind of unbeatable. But I have been able to work with people even all over the world at this point, talking them through the right way to do the recovery techniques, let's call them, or, the fascia release techniques on their own. And it takes a little bit longer, but the results are the same because we're still using the same principle of compressing with active movement and then also going to the right places within their fascial system that's likely causing the pain. So it's taking a little bit longer, I think, out of the lack of intense compression, but it's still working.
This is just something I was thinking about, and I want your take on it. When everybody is zigging, I think sometimes it's good to zag. So what I mean by that is, yes, you're going online. That's great. Everyone's online now. You can't not have a foot online. You're missing out on a piece of the pie, so to speak, right? And it's important for lifestyle. We can't work however many hours a day. However, when everybody's going online, when we have AI here to at least in my space, who can probably design a better workout than I can, at least maybe in the next few years, I think it's important to be able to have that hands-on personal touch in our industry. And I believe what you do is even more sort of personal than personal training, right? There's a connection there when you're helping people. So I think, I'm just speaking sort of to the general population. It's good to keep your practice, also your physical practice, and be able to work with people hands-on, because that's really what you can upcharge for. You're not going to be able to upcharge for the online stuff because everybody's ordering that. But what you can is imagine there was somebody with your skill set who is also personal training, and now you give 2 hours to them. You go, the first 15 minutes we warm up, and then we do a 45-minute workout, and then we do a special cool down, then we do a fascial release, and we do all these things, right? That is something that's not offered anywhere. So I would just tell everyone else, when everyone else is running to online, think about all that you can do like this, right? Having more of a hands-on approach where you can build a connection with a client.
Absolutely. And really, we, in that same sense, or in that same vein, I guess, is everyone wants to feel a difference in whatever they're doing. They want to feel a difference as soon as they possibly can, right? No one wants to hear when they go into the chiropractor that they're going to need to come 3 times a week for 6 months to solve their back pain. Sorry, my dogs are going absolutely bananas in the background. But this type of work, if you really can understand, simply through feeling someone's tissue and looking to see how they're moving or what their alignment does, if you can provide a quick relief moment for them, which I've seen more times than not with this work, you also will get the most raving fans. Like I don't want this to sound like a brag fully, but I have not had to market for my practice in about 6 or 7 years now, because I'm able to help people understand their own body and go to where these pain patterns are contributing to, like, the real root cause of their pain. And it's such an incredible way to build, like, they'll tell everyone about it. They will tell all of their friends, and that'll really set you apart from the average person that is, only has one thing to offer, or they're not really understanding why you have knee pain. So they're just avoiding lunges or just avoiding anything that makes it hurt. Like, you'll have better longevity of your clients if you can really help eliminate their pain, or at the very least make it completely manageable if you have an extra skill set like that.
Is your course connected to any CEUs from any of the other training programs?
Not yet, but it is actually an application that I'm going to be submitting soon.
So yeah, we can talk off camera about it. I've done it with my courses for a bunch of it, and we can talk off camera about it.
I would love that.
It's worthwhile and not that difficult. So
okay.
Well, let's get into that now. Where do people find your course? Where do they find more about you specifically? If they have maybe a question from the course side as somebody in my industry, or if they're just general population and they have questions about their pain, where do they reach out?
Yeah, I think the easiest place to go is movementbyjulia.com. That will give you more information about me and my practice, but it also has my certification courses listed. And if there is any, for any reason you need more info, or you want to make sure it's a good fit, or, the right fit for you, depending on your industry or what your other credentials are, I'm happy to hop on a call with you and make sure that it is something that is going to perfectly work out.
I will put all those links in the podcast description, as well as the link to the last podcast, which is not just audio, but also video, and you can watch it. It was fantastic. So I would tell everyone to go back there if you want even a deeper dive into the fascial release. My guest today has been Julia Blackwell. Julia, thank you for joining the Trulyfit Podcast.
Thank you so much.